I was standing at the altar, smiling at my bride, when my phone buzzed with a message that burned like acid. "You're fired. Consider it my gift to you." It was from my boss's arrogant son, the man who had spent years stealing credit, dripping envy over every success I had earned. On the day I promised love, he gave me humiliation. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, heart pounding, face frozen in a smile for the cameras. 3 hours later, I glanced down. 108 missed calls. And every single one carried the same desperation. For 15 years, I had been the quiet backbone of Callaway Tech. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't political. But I carried the core platform on my shoulders. When the servers went down, I was the one who got the calls at 2 a.m. When a client threatened to walk away, I was the one they sent into the room to steady the deal. My creed was simple: deliver, document, do right. I wrote everything down, not because I was paranoid, but because I believed truth deserved a paper trail. Somewhere in my files sat years of notes, time-stamped emails, careful logs, my invisible shield against the chaos of ambition and greed. At home, it was different. My mother's health was failing, her body shrinking inside hospital gowns that never seemed to fit. She would smile at me during visits, her voice soft but insistent. "Don't bury yourself in that office, Evan. Life isn't just work." Maya, my fiancée, echoed the same plea. After the wedding, I told her, again and again, pressing promises into her hand like folded paper I hoped she'd keep safe. After the wedding, I'd slow down. After the wedding, I'd breathe. But first, I had to finish one more build, one more launch, one more sleepless night. I still remember the last evening before the ceremony. Maya sat on the couch, trying to hide her worry while I typed away. Midnight stretched into 2, my fingers stiff, my eyes burning. When I finally shut the laptop, I saw her curled under a blanket, half asleep, whispering, "You're going to miss it all if you don't stop." I kissed her forehead and promised again. After tomorrow, things would change. The morning of the wedding, my mother's smile anchored me. Her face, pale and worn, brightened when she saw me in my suit. "You look like your father," she said, and for a moment, I felt something warm loosen inside me. It was the breath I'd been holding for years. This was supposed to be my turning point. Then the email appeared, a ping on my phone. Subject line: Board strategy, Sunday 7 a.m. Private. I blinked at it, unsettled. Who schedules a strategy board on a Sunday morning? Who hides it under the label private? I slid the phone back into my pocket, telling myself not to think about it. Today wasn't about work. Today was about vows and rings and the life I was about to start. Still, the thought gnawed at me. A secret Sunday board meeting. Have you ever seen one of those? I shook it off as we walked down the aisle. The applause, the smiles, the warm hands of family pressing against my back. They drowned out the doubts for a while. But even amid the joy, cracks were already spreading beneath the surface. I had learned to swallow disappointment in silence. I'd crafted entire decks only to watch Brent, the CEO's son, parade them as his own. My slides, my models, my projections, signed with his name as though I didn't exist. The first time it happened, I told myself it didn't matter. Credit was vanity, and results spoke for themselves. But when it kept happening, when executives began thanking him for my work while I stood in the corner, invisible, I felt the bile rise in my throat. The exclusions became sharper. No more CC'd emails on revenue. No invites to steering meetings I once led. My access narrowed while Brent's reach grew, his charm oiling doors open while mine closed. Still, I endured, because the system I built still ran on my blood. Or so I thought. One afternoon, combing through reconciliations, I caught it. Revenue recognized weeks early. Deals marked closed, though the ink wasn't dry. A violation of policy. A red flag in bold letters. I filed a report through the compliance channel. Anonymous, but thorough. I didn't think of revenge then. I thought of integrity, of what I'd built my career on. But the moment I clicked send, a chill ran through me. Brent had power, and power rarely forgave honesty. Maya noticed the weight I carried. Over dinner, she laid her hand over mine. "Win slow is still a win," she whispered. "Don't fight them on their terms. Just keep being you." I nodded, though I wasn't sure who me was anymore. The builder, the father's son, the invisible workhorse no one thanked. That night, as I sat in the living room reviewing code, a message slid into my screen from my manager. Just 5 words. "Keep your head down. Big moves coming?" I stared at it, pulse hammering, the room suddenly too quiet. Something was unfolding above me, a game I wasn't meant to see. My wedding was hours away. My life was supposed to change, but the shadow of the office had already crept into the ceremony. And for the first time in 15 years, I wondered if all my careful notes, all my promises, would be enough to survive what was coming. The wedding band had barely cooled on my finger when my phone lit up with the message that would carve itself into my memory forever. "You're fired. Consider it my gift to you." I stared at the screen, blinking once, twice, as if the words might change. They didn't. Brent Calloway, the son of the CEO, had chosen my wedding day to humiliate me. His envy finally unmasked itself in a single line of text. Guests laughed nearby, clinking glasses, but my hands had gone cold around the phone. I slipped it into my pocket, pasting on a smile as if nothing had happened. Maya noticed, her eyes narrowing in quiet worry, but she said nothing. For her sake, I played the role of the groom. Yet inside, anger boiled with a sharp edge of disbelief. Nepotism wasn't new to me, but to be stripped of my career in front of God, family, and friends, without even the courtesy of a conversation, it was cruelty, pure and deliberate. Hours later, when the laughter had faded and the cake was gone, I finally glanced at my phone again. The screen glowed with desperation. 108 missed calls. Every department, every line, even the main office number. A voicemail blinked at the top. I played it. "This is urgent. Call back immediately. The system is failing." My chest tightened. Of course it was failing. Brent had been tampering with production for weeks, pushing untested patches, chasing applause with reckless speed. The inevitable had arrived, and they wanted me, the man they'd just discarded, to clean it up. Before I could decide whether to respond, another call came in. Richard Calloway, the father, the CEO, my boss for 15 years. I hesitated, then answered. "Evan." Richard's voice was strained, cracking under a weight I hadn't heard before. "This wasn't me. That text, it was Brent. He had no authority. Listen to me, son. We need you back. Now." The word son caught in my ear. Richard had never called me that before. For years, I had been invisible, the reliable mule in the shadows. And now, because his own blood had burned the company, he reached for me as if I were family. I almost laughed. The rift between father and son was opening wide enough to swallow us all. Maya placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, whispering, Answer only if it serves you. Her eyes, wet with tears, held mine until I nodded. I ended the call without promising a thing. That night, I sat at the desk in our hotel suite, the remnants of the wedding strewn around me, wilted flowers, half-drunk champagne, ribbons unraveling. I opened my laptop. Years of meticulous journals, compliance notes, forwarded emails to legal and risk assessments sat in organized folders. My so-called paranoia had always been my discipline. Now it was my weapon. I scrolled through a particular report. The early revenue recognition Brent had pushed, the false milestone updates. I had flagged them, documented them, and filed them into compliance weeks ago. I had proof. A ping from an encrypted chat appeared. A colleague, anonymous. Brent pushed fake milestones. He's blaming you. Be careful. My jaw clenched. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd thought. Brent wasn't just trying to erase me. He was building a case to bury me. I thought of my mentor, Caleb, who had left Callaway Tech years earlier for a rival firm, a man of principle, one of the few I trusted. I drafted a short, careful message. Nothing violating NDA, nothing sensitive, only a question couched in public information. If a company recognized revenue early to boost quarterlies, what would the SEC do? His reply was swift. If proven, they'd make an example out of them. Jail time isn't off the table. I closed my laptop and dialed my mother. She answered in her soft, tired voice. Evan. I'm okay, I told her, keeping my tone steady. Don't worry. I'm okay. Silence lingered. She didn't press. Somehow, she knew I was lying, but she let me keep the illusion. When I hung up, another notification blinked onto my phone. A calendar invite. Subject line, Board plus External Counsel. Tonight. No explanation, no context, just urgency wrapped in secrecy. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. A private Sunday board meeting with lawyers. This was no longer about office politics. Something larger was moving, and my name, my work, my integrity was in the center of it. And for the first time, I wasn't just the mule carrying the load. I was the man holding the match. They called me back to headquarters 3 days after the wedding. The boardroom smelled of fresh polish and cold fear. Executives lined the table, avoiding my eyes, while Brent lounged at the far end, smug in his designer suit. Richard sat in the center, gray around the edges, a man cornered by his own bloodline. Evan, one of the lawyers began, sliding a folder toward me. If you sign this acknowledgement, we can resolve this quietly. The severance package will be adjusted favorably. In return, you'll accept responsibility for the discrepancies in reporting. I let the words hang in the air. They wanted me to shoulder Brent's sins, to be the scapegoat in their theater of damage control. My pulse steadied, my voice calm. Open your laptops, I said. Check the time-stamped logs, every milestone, every flag, every compliance report. I filed them all. I warned you before the numbers were published. The room shifted. A few glanced nervously at each other. Others scrolled through inboxes, pale faces betraying the truth, justice in black and white. And then it happened. A young project manager at the back, barely 30, cleared his throat. His voice shook, but didn't falter. It wasn't Evan. Brent told us to backdate the KPI entries. He said the quarter had to look strong, no matter what. The words dropped like a stone into water. All eyes swung to Brent. His smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of rage he couldn't quite hide. Richard's jaw tightened, his hands clenching around his pen until it snapped. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. I remembered Maya's hand in mine on our wedding day, her whisper, "Don't lose yourself." That vow anchored me more than any contract ever had. Richard leaned forward, his voice low, almost strangled. "Evan, what did Brent text you? Exactly?" The room froze. The question wasn't legal, it was paternal. He wanted confirmation of his son's betrayal, written in digital ink. I held his gaze, but I didn't answer. Some truths cut deeper than silence. When I walked out of that boardroom, I knew what I had to do. Retaliation wasn't about sabotage, it was about exposing rot. I didn't touch the systems, didn't pull any wires. Instead, I opened my archive of warnings and forwarded them. Not to Richard, not to the board, but to the independent counsel assigned to corporate governance. The whistleblower channel, protected, legal, irrefutable. The reply came within hours. Received. Under review. Maintain confidentiality. The next morning, Richard called me again. His tone was softer, more desperate. "Come back. Help us contain this. We'll make it worth your while." "I'll return only if 3 conditions are met," I said evenly. "An independent audit, Brent removed from all approval chains, and protection for anyone who comes forward." There was silence, then the sound of a man exhaling his pride. "You're asking for the impossible." "No," I corrected. "I'm asking for the truth." Later that week, an unexpected message arrived from Caleb, my old mentor at the rival firm. He'd heard whispers, maybe from regulators, maybe from the press. "We want you here, Evan," he wrote. "But understand this. No stolen IP, no ghosts from Callaway. You walk in clean or not at all." It was the kind of offer Brent would never get. Respect tethered to principle. I typed back, I wouldn't bring a single line of their code, just my own hands. That evening, Maya set the table with candles, the faint smell of rosemary chicken filling the apartment. We ate in silence, a silence that wasn't heavy but grounding. She caught my eye and smiled, as if to remind me that not everything had to be war. For one night, I allowed myself to believe that. The next morning, the headlines cracked like thunder. Revenue recognition concerns at Callaway Tech. The story was out, carried by financial papers that never published without evidence. My evidence. The whispers had become shouts, and the empire Brent thought he owned was beginning to shake. I set the newspaper aside, sipped my coffee, and waited. Because this was only the beginning. The headlines multiplied overnight. What had begun as whispers in one financial column spread like wildfire across every business outlet. Nepotism at Callaway Tech. Revenue manipulation suspected, board silent. Reporters dug deeper, dragging into daylight what many inside the company already knew. Brent's shortcuts, his backdated milestones, his obsession with inflating numbers to impress investors. By the end of the week, major clients froze their contracts. Emails flooded the press offices from frustrated customers. If Callaway can't guarantee clean books, how can we trust their platform? Shares tumbled, and analysts speculated on whether the company could survive the quarter. I followed it all from my living room, coffee in hand, my name absent from every article. That was intentional. I had moved quietly, leaving only enough of a trail for regulators, never for the press. But I wasn't the only one feeding the fire. A new report surfaced, a leak from an anonymous insider. It contained invoices and inflated quotes that went beyond anything I'd submitted. Someone else had been keeping their own records, documenting Brent's schemes. The media called it the smoking gun. I called it vindication, and yet My stomach tightened. Every blast of truth scorched not only Brent, but the innocents caught in his wake. Project coordinators, junior engineers, the accountants who'd simply clicked approve because their jobs depended on it. Maya found me late that night, staring at the television as pundits debated whether Brent would face criminal charges. She touched my shoulder gently. Our daughter, Emma, padded into the room in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, why are they saying bad things about your company on TV?" I pulled her into my lap, her small frame grounding me in ways nothing else could. "Sometimes," I told her, "doing the right thing can feel lonely. But lonely doesn't mean wrong." She rested her head against me, half asleep, and I wondered if those words would ever be enough. The following morning, a knock came at my door. Not a neighbor, not a friend. A courier, crisp in uniform, handed me an envelope stamped with the seal of the SEC. Inside was a subpoena, a demand for records and testimony. The Department of Justice's name appeared alongside it. My eyes skimmed the lines until they landed on the detail that mattered most. Brent Calloway, flagged as a primary subject. I closed the envelope slowly, my breath steady. The law was coming for him now, and there was no undoing it. Still, the chaos hadn't yet peaked. Over the next 2 weeks, Callaway Tech bled talent. Senior engineers walked out in waves, recruiters circling like vultures. Brent was suspended, pending investigation, his swagger silenced by the weight of official scrutiny. Richard, meanwhile, scrambled in damage control, summoning emergency board meetings that leaked almost as soon as they ended. Through one of those leaks, I learned the truth. Richard had never truly believed Brent was capable, but the board and outside investors had forced his hand. They had demanded a Callaway heir remain in the chain of command. Fear of losing his chair had tethered Richard to his son's recklessness. It wasn't just nepotism. It was capitulation. The cowardice of a man more afraid of losing power than of losing principle. And now, the power was slipping anyway. One evening, my phone rang again. A lawyer from the investigative team asked if I would be willing to serve as a witness. I had the logs, the reports, the compliance filings that painted the timeline clearly. They needed me to tie the threads together. "I'll think about it," I said. Because thinking about it was all I could do. Testifying might bring the truth forward, but it would also drag down names of colleagues who had only signed off out of fear. Some were guilty, yes, but others were only casualties of Brent's arrogance. My testimony could cleanse or condemn. It all depended on how the prosecutors used it. I carried that weight with me into the supermarket one Saturday afternoon. Pushing a cart down the aisle, I spotted Martin, an old teammate. He froze when he saw me, then gave a single silent nod before walking on. No words, no small talk, just recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of the storm between us. That nod lingered with me longer than any article. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, the sun low and bleeding into the horizon, I saw a figure waiting near my porch. Alone, Richard Callaway. No chauffeurs, no board members, no Brent. Just a father, a CEO, standing on my steps as if the weight of his empire had finally driven him to my door. Richard stood stiffly on my porch, his face lined deeper than I had ever seen in the boardroom. For a moment, he wasn't the CEO of Callaway Tech, but simply a father crushed under the weight of his son's sins. I opened the door, and he entered without a word, settling heavily into the chair across from me. His hands trembled, not with age, but with guilt. I made choices, Evan, he began, staring at the floor. Not because they were right, but because they kept the investors quiet. I thought if I gave Brent space, he'd grow into the role. Instead, I lost my company, and maybe my son. He pulled a folder from his coat and slid it across the table. Inside were contracts, PR invoices, proof that Brent had siphoned company funds into fabricated press releases, paying media outlets to polish his image, to bury criticism under glowing reviews. The rot went deeper than I had imagined. Maya entered quietly, setting 2 mugs of tea down. She didn't speak, just rested her hand briefly on my shoulder before retreating to the kitchen, leaving the air between us raw and unguarded. I looked Richard in the eye. If you want me to help, it won't come cheap. Protect every whistleblower, repay the customers for the false numbers, and step down, on your terms, not theirs. His mouth opened as if to protest, then closed again. The weight of the request wasn't lost on him. For the first time in his career, Richard Calloway looked like a man stripped of power, forced to confront the naked cost of his ambition. We sat in silence for a long while. Outside, the wind scraped against the windows. Finally, he whispered, voice quivering, "There's someone above me." The words sank like lead. Above him? A CEO, admitting he wasn't at the top. My chest tightened. He wasn't talking about Brent. He was talking about something larger, something shadowed behind the facade of the company. The next day confirmed it. An encrypted email arrived, unsigned, containing documents that mapped out connections between Callaway Tech and 3 other corporations, inflated contracts, mirrored invoices, staged cross-company purchases designed to balloon quarterly earnings across the entire sector. This wasn't just one company's rot. It was an industry-wide illusion. I realized then that Richard's confession was only the surface of a web that spanned far wider. I reached out to contacts, old friends, trusted peers, people like me who had kept journals, logs, and evidence, quietly storing the truth for years. One by one, they replied. I wasn't alone. Across different firms, other workers had seen the same game played. Artificial deals, manipulated books, investors fed lies dressed as progress. In late-night calls and whispered messages, we formed something unspoken, a coalition of the honest, determined to pierce the facade. Not all of them were ready to step forward, but the knowledge that they existed steadied me. For years, I thought I was the lone mule carrying the burden. Now, I saw we were many. Even stranger, some high-ranking executives reached out anonymously. We've wanted to clean this up for years, one message read. If you move, we'll back you. These weren't small players. They were voices with influence, waiting for someone else to light the fuse. But lighting the fuse meant collateral. The scandal would not only topple Brent, it would drag into the open the names of people who had signed papers under duress, families who relied on paychecks from companies poisoned by greed. Was I willing to sacrifice them for the sake of a clean industry? The question gnawed at me. Would I expose everything, or temper the strike to shield the innocent? And if I held back, would the rot simply fester again in another form? That night, as I stared at my laptop, weighing the files against the faces I knew, Maya slipped her arms around me. You don't have to carry it all alone, she whispered. For a moment, I closed my eyes, the warmth of her voice pulling me back from the edge. The following morning, another email came. This time, not anonymous. The Department of Commerce and the SEC had formed a joint task force. They wanted me to join, not as a witness, but as an advisor, someone who could help unravel the mess across the sector. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the words. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding the system from the inside out. And I knew then that the next step would decide not only Brent's fate, not only Richard's, but the trajectory of an entire industry. I signed the offer with a pen that felt heavier than it should. The contract was clear, written in language sharper than any I had ever seen. Zero tolerance for nepotism, mandatory real-time auditing, strict protection for whistleblowers. It wasn't just a job, it was a declaration. At the new firm, I wouldn't just write code or manage systems. I would help shape a culture. When I walked into the office on my first day, I recognized more faces than I expected. Old colleagues from Callaway Tech, engineers who had once been invisible like me, analysts who had lost promotions because they refused to lie. They had migrated here, gathering in quiet defiance. We weren't refugees. We were builders, carrying scars, but still capable of laying new foundations. Together, we built systems that left no room for shadow deals. Every number, every milestone, logged transparently. Every approval required dual oversight. We called it clean metrics, at first as a joke, but the name stuck. Within months, other companies began asking for our framework, realizing that customers and investors trusted honesty more than inflated promises. At home, life softened. The first morning I walked Emma to school, her small hand clutching mine, Maya snapped a photo from the porch. "First time, huh?" she teased. Emma laughed, swinging my arm. That simple walk, something ordinary for most fathers, felt extraordinary to me. It was the redemption I hadn't known I was searching for. Yet beneath the hope, the industry still trembled. One evening, as I reviewed audit dashboards, an email arrived. The subject line was short, clinical. We might have the same disease. It came from a multinational far larger than Callaway Tech, hinting that the rot wasn't confined to one corner. The dominoes were still lined up, waiting. But for now, I focused on what we had built. On the mornings with Emma. On Maya's laughter when I cooked dinner without burning it. On the fragile sense of balance that had taken years to find. News from Callaway Tech trickled in over time. The company had been gutted and rebuilt. Brent disappeared from the industry entirely, resurfacing months later in a local news piece, volunteering at a community center, sweeping floors, serving meals. Some called it penance, others called it exile. I didn't care which. For me, his absence from the boardroom was justice enough. Richard stepped down quietly, replaced by a board-elected CEO who promised reform. The name Callaway still carried weight, but no longer as a guarantee of deceit. They were trying, at least. And maybe that was enough. My role shifted too. I was no longer just an employee. Within a year, I became an independent ethics advisor called into boardrooms across the country to consult on compliance and culture. With Caleb's help, I launched a small foundation dedicated to protecting whistleblowers, people like me who had once stood alone with nothing but logs and conscience. The highlight of my new life wasn't the contracts or the reforms. It was Emma's birthday. For the first time, I was there from the moment she woke until the candles went out. She tugged my sleeve, grinning as she introduced me to her friends. "This is my dad. He helps people tell the truth." That simple sentence struck deeper than any accolade I'd ever earned. As the night wound down, and Emma fell asleep, I sat in her room, watching her breathe. Justice, I realized, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet presence at a birthday table, the steady hand guiding a child to school, the chance to choose integrity over ambition. But justice was never finished. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message appeared, unsigned, with only 6 words. Are you ready for round 2? I stared at it, the room dim except for the glow of the screen. Somewhere out there, another company was rotting. Another Brent, building his empire on lies. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled and steadied me at once, that my story wasn't over.